Good morning.
Good morning, Suzanne.
Please state your name.
Tommie Douglas Benefield Jr.,
Can you spell those?
Tommie, middle name Douglas, Douglas, last name Benefield, Benefield, and Jr.
And what was your relationship to Doug Benefield?
I'm Doug's first cousin.
Okay. How close were you and Doug?
Doug and I were completely attached, connected all the way through his adult life at varying times from daily to semi-annually, certainly quarterly, though in a whole entire adult life.
How are you employed?
I'm currently employed by a major airline out of Atlanta, Georgia, and I run a flight school or a portion of a flight school in Vero Beach, Florida.
Were you and Doug close about flying?
Yes, ma'am. He followed me into the Navy. I was a Navy pilot off aircraft carriers, and Doug stayed with me in the months prior to him going into the Navy. He went through aviation officer candidate school, went through flight school, and then flew for 3 years and 2 deployments off aircraft carriers like I did. Same aircraft carrier, USS Nimitz, as a matter of fact.
How old was Doug Benefield when he died?
He was 5 years younger than me. I'm 68 now. That was 4 years ago. 64. He was 59.
How tall was Doug?
5'9", 5'10" at the most.
Approximately how much did he weigh at the time?
My guess is 160, 165. He was slender and fairly small for a man.
Before Doug moved to Florida, where did he live?
He had a home all the way up until his death in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, just north of Charleston. 701 Preservation Place was the address.
He lived at that address before moving to Bradenton, Florida, correct?
Yes, ma'am. And then he rented the house out when he moved to Bradenton for visitation of their daughter.
Before he met Ashley, who did he live with at the house?
The house for multiple years was Doug, his longtime wife Renee, and their daughter Eva. That's prior to Renee's death in 2015, December of 2015.
So Renee died in 2015. Do you know how she died?
Yes, ma'am. She died of a undiagnosed heart ailment, cardiac arrest.
Oh.
Not qualified.
Lack of qualifications,
Yes.
overruled on that basis.
Was Renee Eva Benefield's mother?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, can you say that date again?
I believe it's December 2nd, but I may have the day off, but not the month of 2015.
2015. I want to ask you now, switch to Ashley. So about how long after Renee died did Doug meet Ashley?
9 months.
When did you first meet Ashley?
I met Ashley in the spring of 2017. The date was either March 14th or April 14th.
Did you know about Ashley before you met her?
No, ma'am.
How did your meeting come about?
I was flying for Southwest Airlines as captain at the time. They changed my schedule like they do many times in the airline world. And I ended up not overnighting in Baltimore, Maryland, and they sent me to Charleston, South Carolina. Because I was going to Charleston, I texted Doug and said, hey, I'll be in to Charleston tonight. I'd like to have dinner. And he said, great. Text.
Sustained.
During your conversations, did he mention the name Ashley?
In the second text chain, which is entered.
Sustained.
I'm asking because
I can answer the question, ma'am. When I arrived in Charleston, I texted Doug, and his text to me specifically was,
you can't speak about what Doug said to you,
okay,
but during the text messages, did he indicate to you there was a female involved?
yes, that's the first mention of Ashley to me, that we were not going to have dinner at the airport and that I was to take Uber up to Mount Pleasant to meet them.
How long were you with them, the two of them together?
4 to 5 hours. We started at the house. We ended up going back to my hotel, a piece of medical technology, medical device that I was a master trainer in that device. We had dinner together at a pizza restaurant across from the hotel, and then went back to my room in the hotel, the three of us, certainly 4 to 5 hours that day.
During this time, did you have multiple conversations with both of them?
We had conversations about everything, especially about how they met.
What did Ashley say about how they met?
She talked about how they met at a political event, a meeting where Doug and his business investors were.
Personal knowledge.
Defendant's statement.
Overruled.
You can go ahead.
Both Ashley and Doug told me about how they met the first night at a political meeting, how Ashley had reached out to him before that meeting. They showed me text messages between them for the 10 days between the first meeting and her second meeting with him up in Charleston, Mount Pleasant. Talked about how they had mutual interest, mutual alignment, how they were looking for the same thing. She talked specifically about her fibromyalgia, pain associated with her ballet dancing days. Ashley talked about her mother, her upbringing, about her father, about the separation there.
Do you have an objection
Yes, sir.
on the basis?
Hearsay.
Understanding this is the defendant's statement.
Yes.
All right, overruled.
She said that her and Doug met at a political event.
Yes, ma'am.
At the time that you were meeting with them, were they married?
Yes, ma'am.
Did Ashley indicate to you when they got married or how long they had been married?
Yes, ma'am. 13 days from first meeting.
Did Ashley indicate where they got married?
Yes, ma'am.
And where was that?
That was in Mount Pleasant or Charleston. Doug's best friend at the time, Tripp, married them.
Did Ashley ever discuss with you that she carried a gun?
Yes.
And what did she say about that?
She said that on their initial meeting, in the political meeting, that she and Doug's traveling partner in business went outside of Secret Service people, and she showed him the gun she was carrying at that event in her bra.
And she talked to you about this during your meeting?
Yes, ma'am.
I want to jump forward. Did you have any conversations that night about them wanting to have a child? Or was that a different time?
I don't remember us talking about it that first night. No, ma'am.
Do you remember a conversation with Doug and Ashley, specifically Ashley, about them wanting a child?
I believe it was later in late spring, the next time that I visited with them.
To your knowledge, could Doug have children?
He had had a vasectomy after having his daughter with Renee, his longtime wife.
Did Ashley,
I'm sorry, so no, couldn't have children.
did Ashley speak about that in front of you, Ashley and Doug together, or Ashley separate about the vasectomy?
They did when they were discussing having Doug have a vasectomy reversal. Yes, ma'am, I believe so.
To your knowledge, did that reversal ultimately go through?
Yes, ma'am, and I believe Ashley actually paid for it on a credit card. They talked about that.
Ultimately, she became pregnant.
Yes, 3 months after the vasectomy reversal, she became pregnant. Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to skip a little bit forward now.
Yes, ma'am.
Did they end up having a wedding reception?
They did. I believe it was June of 2017. I was single parenting at the time, and I wasn't able to attend, but it was in Charleston, South Carolina, at the home of one of Doug's business partner.
You mentioned something about ballet dancing. In your meetings and discussions with Ashley, did she indicate she was interested in the ballet?
She spoke about the fact that she had been a ballet dancer, that she had performed in, I'll call them shows, I believe in Maryland, where she grew up. By the time that I first met Ashley, she had formed the ballet company called the American National Ballet in Charleston. At the time that I first met her, they were working on getting that ballet company up and running.
Was this going to be a large endeavor?
Several $1 million, yes, ma'am. Up to 40 dancers were hired.
In your discussions with Ashley, did you find out what Doug's role was?
Yeah, Doug and Ashley talked about it on the first night I met her, how they founded the ballet, how Doug did the online limited liability corporation, founded the name, resurrected that name, how they worked together to try to build a ballet that was diverse and open to more than one body size, body shape, body color. That was the philosophy of the ballet as they explained it. That was Ashley's dream.
And how was it funded?
It was funded several ways. A number of Doug's business partner, friends, and Doug himself invested money. They had a major, let's say, arts benefactor in Charleston, is a personal injury lawyer who was going to be the primary major donor. In Doug's case, Doug was working on very advanced technologies and patents at the time. And in his case, he didn't have any savings or cash in the bank. So he sold his future stock grants and options to other investors to put his own money in, about $100,000 in his case.
While this ballet was in development or launching, did Ashley ultimately become pregnant? I know you said she became pregnant several months later, but I'm just trying to get a timeline.
Yes, ma'am. February of 2017 are the records and what they told me about founding it. I met her in maybe a month or two after that on that Charleston overnight. They held the first ballet event, and I was invited in May of 2017. Once again, single parent, I wasn't able to attend. She got pregnant in July, and we talked about that multiple times. And the next month in August was the large launch, which me, my business partners, my veteran friends, supporters of Doug all went to Charleston for that major launch in August.
At that time, was Ashley pregnant in August?
She was pregnant. I don't remember if she knew or not. It was 1 month after Emerson was conceived.
And at some point, did Ashley move away from the South Carolina?
Yes, ma'am. We had the August Ballet big launch. 2 weeks later, Doug moved Ashley down to Ashley's mother's home in Lakewood Ranch. Drove down one day, dropped her off, and drove back the next day. That's late August.
In your discussions with Ashley, either text or in person or on the telephone, did she indicate to you that she was going to Florida because she was sick
That
and
was the initial indication. Yes, ma'am.
and her mother could better take care of her?
Yes, ma'am.
Throughout the time that you saw Doug and Ashley together, how did Doug act?
In particular on the opening night and all the way through their relationship. Opening night, totally in love, both of them in love with each other. Doug was always very respectful. He was very, very respectful with her in front of me, both that initial night and then the next weekend, I believe in May, that I spent down in Sarasota, Bradenton with them. Every time he was respectful of her. They were in love. They never showed anything in front of me other than caring for each other.
That was going to be my next question. So did you see anything other than that?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Taylor, as I've said before, you're free to use the podium if you prefer to cross from table. Yes, sir.
Morning, Mr. Benefield.
Good morning, Mr. Taylor.
You were a naval pilot, correct?
Navy pilot, yes, sir.
I think you mentioned the training that you had briefly, correct?
I went through extensive training all my 30-year career, yes, sir.
Some of that training included close quarters combat, did it not?
No, sir, never.
No hand-to-hand
No, sir.
training at all.
No, sir.
Do you remember having a conversation where you related information about close quarters?
Yes, sir. I was in charge. I was the senior.
Do you remember that conversation
Which one, sir? I don't know which one
about
you're
close
speaking about.
quarters combat?
If it was in perspective of me running security and self-defense training for my airline, not the Navy.
You received no such training in the Navy.
No, sir, never.
Did Doug admit to you firing the gun in the kitchen of their home?
Can we approach?
Yes.
Do you recall that Ashley had left your cousin Doug in the fall of 2017?
Yes, sir.
Specifically September 18th of 2017.
Yes, sir. I'm aware of that date and the events.
Do you recall writing to Ashley Benefield in a text in May of 2018, I'm a fan of yours?
Hearsay.
So, Mr. Benefield, following Ashley's leaving your cousin Doug, September 18th of 2017, were you a fan of Ashley Benefield's in May of 2018?
I don't remember specifically that word, but it may have been in our lengthy phone calls and text messages from January through June, possibly.
You expressing support for her.
Support for her story of the case, yes, sir.
Did you tell her, in fact, at one point, she married the wrong Benefield?
Sustained.
Did you feel that she married the wrong Benefield?
Relevant.
Approach.
Thank you. So, Mr. Benefield, after expressing your support for Miss Benefield in 2018, several months after she left your cousin Doug. By the way, do you know why she left your cousin Doug?
The initial reason or the second reason, sir?
Do you know the reasons that Ashley Benefield gave your cousin Doug as to why she left him?
Objection. Hearsay.
I'm going to need the source. Is this from,
Well, I'm not going to ask.
was it being offered for the truth?
It's not being offered for the truth, and I'm not going to go into the substance. I just want to know if this witness knows.
Oh,
You can answer. Did Doug share with you the reasons why she left him?
He shared two different reasons.
You express several months following that you're a fan of hers. And do you also not say to her that she married the wrong Benefield?
I don't remember that specific text in the 6 months of open communication between she and I.
Let me see if I can refresh your recollection. Mr. Benefield.
Objection. Forensic evidence.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to show you a document. Why don't you take a moment and look at it and tell us if that refreshes your recollection as to whether or not suggested to Miss Benefield she'd married the wrong Benefield.
Does not say anything about marrying the wrong Benefield.
Does it say,
Objection.
Hold on, sir, has that document, without identifying it, we need to lay the predicate.
Mr. Benefield, is that document reflective of the communication that you shared with Miss Benefield?
I believe it's correct and unaltered.
And it's between you and Miss Benefield?
Yes, sir.
And it's accurate, is it not?
I believe so.
Now, may I approach?
Yes.
Do you say thank you, Ron
Objection.
Benefield?
Yeah, approach.
Does the document I've shown you, Mr. Benefield, refresh your recollection of that particular change?
Yes, sir.
Would you tell us your recollection having been refreshed? Tell us what your response was to Ashley's text.
This is 6 months and you want me to just focus on
Just tell us
one
what your,
line. Is that
Mr.
what correct,
Benefield,
Mr. Taylor?
just tell us what your response was to Ashley's text, your recollection having been refreshed.
Ashley says in the text,
Mr. Benefield,
Sustain.
please tell us what your response to Miss Benefield's text was now that your recollection has been refreshed.
there are multiple on the page, sir.
Mr. Benefield, I think you know what I'm referring to. Would you please answer my question?
I would like to answer it as it pertains to what she said.
I didn't ask you what she said, Mr. Benefield. I asked you to please tell us your recollection having been refreshed, what you said.
Would you like me to read
And
that
Judge, I would
bubble?
object. We do not need to be reading from this document.
Deputy, would you please take the jury into the jury room? If you could give us 5 minutes, I'd appreciate it. Remember, please don't begin your discussions and deliberations amongst yourselves. You can use your phones if you need to contact people, but don't talk about the case with anyone else. And don't do any research on the people, places, things, or legal topics we've heard anything about. All right, y'all can have a seat. The jury's out. Mr. Benefield, I'm going to excuse you to the hallway. You were not to discuss your testimony or the questions that have been asked of you with anyone,
Yes, sir.
including the attorneys.
Yes, sir.
And you're not to let anybody talk to you about anything that's going on inside the courtroom.
Yes, sir.
We're on a break.
Yes, sir, I will do that. Should I leave the paper here?
Yes, sir, leave that there. When we began this portion of the discussion, the question was, did you tell Ms. Benefield that she married the wrong Benefield? And I sustained that as hearsay with no exception. I found that it didn't provide impeachment of any prior inconsistent statement. What I did allow was as to his then existing mental, physical, or emotional conditions or feelings, with the question being, did you feel that she had married the wrong Benefield? There was then the attempt to use these text messages that I still have not seen. I don't know what the substance of them was, but where we were was my understanding, and what I heard was the defense was attempting to refresh the witness's recollection. What I have said is it sounded like it started to morph into some mix of impeachment and refreshing recollection and some elements of introducing a past recollection recorded. And that's where we're at. Take your objection?
My objection, first of all, is the predicate has been laid to refresh recollection. But then the witness has not been asked what his recollection is, other than to read it off of the paper, which is commingling past recollection and either past recorded or something of that nature. I think we're commingling the two different things. And if this witness needs to be asked, if it refreshes his recollection, then he can be asked that question without reading the document. I would object to any reading of the document because it is extrinsic evidence if it's being used for impeachment. Do not believe his state of mind is relevant to a material issue in this case. I think the defense is trying to say that it goes to bias, but I'm not quite sure how that fits into it. So My objection would be it's improper refreshing recollection. It's improper impeachment. It's also improper prior recorded recollection. And I would object to that being testified about.
Your response, sir?
As succinctly as I can, Your Honor, he's a creep. He acknowledged being a creep, and the jury will conclude he's a creep. It goes directly to his character and his bias. And that's why, after he said, yes, it was accurate, I recall it, he cannot bring himself to say it. And the reason he can't bring himself to say it is because he knows that all these women on the jury are going to know exactly what he was referring to. So I am trying to impugn his credibility after listening to everything that he had to say to set up the state's position about how this relationship was so lovey-dovey and what a wonderful relationship it was. Here, we now have this witness very begrudgingly admitting that after Miss Benefield leaves Douglas Benefield, and she leaves the letter, which I know the court has seen because I attached it as an earlier exhibit to a motion, he's still supporting her. And he's not only supporting her, but he's telling her she married the wrong Benefield. In my world, Your Honor, based upon the rules of evidence, I am entitled to go after his credibility, which he has put in question by virtue of taking the witness stand and becoming a witness. I did it the way the court wanted. I asked the magic question, does this refresh your recollection? He said it did. Now I want him to tell me, in response to my question, did you tell Miss Benefield she married the wrong Benefield? And he cannot bring himself to acknowledge it. He wants to talk about anything else but that. And I think anything that I'm capable of showing where this witness, Doug Benefield's loving cousin, Tommie Benefield, where this witness showed his support for Ashley Benefield after she left Douglas Benefield, goes directly to his credibility. You can't get up there and testify to all of these things about how wonderful this relationship was, and then on cross-examination have to acknowledge that you were still saying you're a fan of Miss Benefield's after she leaves them, knowing the reasons she left them. I intentionally didn't go into the reasons to try to be straight with the court, but now I'm attempting to impugn his credibility. And he knows it, Judge. He's looking at me like a deer in the headlights.
I previously mentioned about confining arguments to legal and factual bases. I am also going to direct both sides to refrain from vituperative ad hominem attacks. I don't think we need to resort to name calling. I think it's inappropriate and unprofessional to refer to a witness as a creep. All right. With that said, go ahead for your response.
The first thing, Judge, I don't know if you have the copy of the text message. The defense could give it to you. Nowhere in there does it say she married the wrong man. That is not what it said, first of all. Second of all, Tommie Benefield never said anything about their relationship and the tenor of their relationship once she left. He said, when I saw them together, they looked fine. Just because that changes down the road and he knows they're having problems, I am unaware of how that affects his credibility. He can clearly see that they're having problems later on down the road. I don't see how the timing being different somehow makes him inconsistent, and somehow that attacks his credibility or it shows his bias. If Mr. Taylor wants to ask him, were you aware that there were problems after that? Yes, I was aware of that. I mean, in Mr. Taylor's argument, he is impeaching the fact that Tommie Benefield saw them acting loving to each other. If that wants to be impeached or explored, then ask Mr. Benefield if he saw them after that or knew that they were not loving and having that type of relationship. I don't understand the relevance of these types of conversations. I think the defense tends to say everything is about bias, but it has to comport with the rules of evidence. I would say that this does not.
Thank you both very much. So my ruling earlier was these statements by Mr. Benefield towards the defendant were hearsay. I wasn't aware of any exception that would allow them, they appear to be offered for the truth of the matter that is asserted. I didn't allow them on that grounds. What I allowed was the defense to ask, because there had been testimony by Tommie Benefield that they were always respectful to each other. You never saw anything except care for each other, and they were in love both ways. I think it is an impeachable question to ask, did you feel that she married the wrong Benefield? But it's not what he wrote. It's what he felt. That's where you're mixing apples and oranges, the defense is. The question that was presented to me was, did you feel that she married the wrong Benefield? He can answer yes or no. If there's then some extrinsic evidence that may impeach him on that point, I would then have to make a determination is that extrinsic evidence admissible or not? Because if it's a collateral matter that's not material, as you well know, Mr. Taylor, you get the answer you get. Where we had an additional part of this analysis was the fact that there was a demonstrated lack of memory, because the answer was, I don't know, as opposed to, no, I didn't say that, or yes, I didn't feel that, yes, I did feel that. Then the path was started on was refreshing recollection. As I've mentioned before, and I mentioned pre-trial, I expect attorneys to know the differences between impeachment by a prior inconsistent statement. That's one path. Refreshing recollection is a second path, and introduction of past recollection recorded, which is a separate path. The reason I'm sustaining the objection is because it started off with refreshing. Does it refresh your memory? And then we got right back into the documents themselves, which I've already ruled were hearsay. So it's for impeachment purposes only. You can ask him about I allowed you to ask what his feelings were, not to get into these documents themselves. I don't know how to say it any more clear than that.
So
if you're refreshing his recollection, then we're going to take that path.
yes, I believe I did that. I believe I refreshed his recollection and he acknowledged that. And my question was,
what did you say? And that gets back to the documents. If he says his memory is refreshed, you take the document back, or whatever the thing is that you use to refresh recollection is to be retrieved. Then the person testifies from their own personal knowledge.
so once he said that he recalls, I then asked him if he said that you married the wrong Benefield. That's what I said. I will be happy to go through that again, Your Honor. Did I leave the document there when I asked him that? Yes. I didn't feel it was necessary to take the document back. But after he acknowledged that his memory was refreshed, I asked him, did you say that she married the wrong Benefield? And that's where we were when Your Honor sent the jury out. He was trying to come to terms with how he was going to answer that. The other text, Your Honor, is just indicative of continued support for Ms. Benefield.
Sir, this doesn't say what you're asking him.
Now approach. Thank you, wrong Benefield. Ms. Benefield says, that's very cool. You should be so proud of what you were doing. His response is, thank you, wrong Benefield. What that means, Your Honor, what that suggests is, thank you. You should have been with me.
Sustained.
I assure you, Judge, that any female will draw that conclusion immediately.
That does not match what you're asking, sir. All right, are we ready to bring the jury back in? Do you want to treat this as your mid-morning break? You guys can take 5 minutes.
All right, am I going to be allowed to get an answer from him?
I've sustained the objection. All right, so we'll take,
I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify your ruling. It's my understanding that you said he could ask how he felt.
correct. The last objection was the questions were going to, what did you write? What did you say in your text messages? Sustained.
So we're clear. Did you feel she married the wrong Benefield?
I've already ruled you could ask that question. All right, Mr. Benefield, come on back in and resume the witness stand. You'll recall that you are under oath.
Yes, sir.
Did anybody attempt to approach you or speak with you about your testimony, the evidence, or this case?
No, sir.
All right. Let's go and bring the jury in. Members of the jury, during that break, did anybody discuss the case amongst yourselves, discuss the case with anybody outside of the jury, or do any research on the people, places, things, or legal topics we've heard anything about? Everybody says no. All right, Mr. Taylor.
Mr. Benefield, when we last were assembled, we were waiting for you to answer the question whether you felt Ashley had married the wrong Benefield.
No, sir, I did not believe that.
Was it a joke?
It was an attempt to keep our communication open between us.
We've established that you were aware that Ashley left Doug in September of 2017.
Yes, sir.
And we've also established that following that, you expressed your support of her.
Yes, sir.
I want to direct your attention specifically to the month of November of 2017. Were you aware of a domestic violence injunction that Ms. Benefield sought and obtained from South Carolina court?
Yes, sir, at that time.
And did you express to Ms. Benefield
You can ask the question.
your support of her after she obtained that domestic violence injunction?
Sustained.
Did you support Ms. Benefield in November of 2017 following the issuance of a domestic violence injunction?
Not specifically about that, sir.
Do you recall expressing your support on Saturday, November 4th, 2017?
I don't remember that specifically, sir.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Benefield, I'm going to show you a document, see if this refreshes your recollection. Does the areas that I check refresh your recollection?
Yes, sir. Those appear to be my statements.
All right, your recollection having been refreshed, Mr. Benefield, on November 4th, following the issuance of the domestic violence injunction to Ms. Benefield, did you express your support to her?
There are two problems with your question for me, sir. I'm going to ask you.
Would you answer my question, and then you can certainly feel free to explain it?
I was unaware of I believe I was unaware of any result of any pending case in South Carolina at the time I texted that.
I thought you just told us you were aware.
I became aware after the mutual protection order was entered. I found out about it after the fact, but I don't remember the date of that event as it relates to the November 4th.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
State, any redirect?
No.
Can this witness be released?
Yes.
Mr. Taylor, can this witness be released from his subpoena?
Yes, sir.
Sir, you are released from your subpoena. The prior restrictions that I placed upon you are removed.
Yes, sir. Thank you.